Yo, what's up YouTube? In today's video, I'm going to break down the top decks from this year's Pokemon TCG World Championships. I'll take a look at each top placing unique deck from the top 16 of the World Championships. If you're interested in more lists from the World Championships, you can head over to limitlesstcg.com. They've got every deck list from the top 128 finishers at this year's World Championships. If you don't already use limitlesstcg.com, I highly recommend it. It's a resource I use for just about everything. If you're looking to pick up Pokemon cards for your collection, make sure to check out fullgripgames.com. Fullgripgames.com has the best selection of Pokemon TCG singles and sealed product. Shopping at fullgripgames.com directly supports the content that I create here on Tricky Gym. Full Grip also has a buy list on their website where they buy bulk and singles. So if you've got extra cards and you want to make some cash or store credit with them, make sure to check out the Full Grip buy list as well. So yeah, that's what we got going on today. Let's hop right into things. First up, we've got our World Championship winning deck, Iron Thorns EX by Fernando Cifuentes. This deck aims to shut down the opponent's abilities with Iron Thorns' initialization ability. I actually posted a YouTube video just a couple of weeks ago on Iron Thorns EX, and it really did seem like it was in a pretty good position heading into the World Championships. Now, some people are critical of Iron Thorns EX, saying it is a kind of a mindless deck to pilot and a boring deck to watch. But that all aside, Iron Thorns is just a meta call. Either the meta is respecting Iron Thorns by playing cards that counter it, such as canceling Cologne or high supporter counts to allow them to churn through their deck, or players are saying, I don't think anybody's going to bring Iron Thorns to the World Championships and maybe don't respect it. And that's the kind of environment that Iron Thorns EX thrives the most in. Iron Thorns has the Volt Cycle attack. It only does 140 damage with double turbo energy attached. It only does 120 damage, but you could boost that back to 140 damage with the Future Booster Energy Capsule. And, you know, that kind of helps even things out. For the most part, Iron Thorns EX is just two-hit KOing things on the opponent's side of the board and hoping that eventually you'll be able to knock out enough of your opponent's Pokemon or major threats so that their deck stumbles somewhere along the line. Colress's Tenacity was also a huge boost for this deck heading into the World Championships, a supporter card that fetches you a Stadium and an Energy card. Colress's Tenacity can go fetch out those double turbo energy, which are needed to get quick and efficient attacks with your Iron Thorns. When watching Fernando play, we saw both Crushing Hammer and Pokemon Catcher used to great effect, as well as the 3 copies of Judge. And you can see just how disruptive this deck is aiming to be. 4 copies of Crushing Hammer, 4 copies of Pokemon Catcher. This deck is trying to remove energy that the opponent is manually attaching to their Pokemon because, for the most part, without their rule box Pokemon's abilities, they're not going to be able to accelerate extra energy into play, like no Teal Mask Ogerpon EX or anything like that. It's tough to accelerate those energy into play. Crushing Hammer has a 50% chance of removing them on a flip. Pokemon Catcher, 4 copies of it with 3 copies of Boss's Orders means that you're going to have a very high likelihood of being able to bring up exactly what target you want to swing into on your opponent's side of the board. A lot of times when people are playing against Iron Thorns EX, they'll put a major threat on their bench and then start manually attaching to it to try and charge it up so that they can start knocking out Iron Thorns. We saw this play out in the finals of the World Championships with the Roaring Moon EX deck. We saw this with Jesse Parker in top 4, trying to manually attach to his Miraidon, stuff like that, on the bench. with 4 copies of Pokemon Catcher, 3 copies of Boss's Orders, and the Prime Catcher. It means that the Iron Thorns deck will always be able to target down exactly what they want to. I really like Fernando's decision to play the Prime Catcher over the Legacy Energy. I did see some Iron Thorns players opting to play the Legacy Energy. I agree with Fernando's line of thought that Prime Catcher is the best ace spec to play in the Iron Thorns deck. We saw how much of a difference it made with the Iron Thorns deck always having the Gust option. He was always targeting down exactly who he wanted to knock out, and I think that's what ended up allowing him to be successful in his top 4 and his finals matches. So I really love this Iron Thorns EX deck. I think it's about as good as it gets for Iron Thorns. Our other finalist deck was a huge surprise. We had Sanosuke Shiokawa finish in second place with his Turbo Roaring Moon EX deck, featuring the new Pecharunt EX from Shrouded Fable, and of course Fezandipity EX. And this deck was a big surprise. Heading into the World Championships, I think everybody expected the premier big basic attacking deck to be Raging Bolt EX. I know I certainly expected that. And then if you asked me for my opinion on the next best big basic attacking deck, I would have told you it was Miraidon. And then if you asked me for my third best big basic attacking deck, then I would have told you Roaring Moon EX with Pecharunt. I did test this deck quite a bit with our Shrouded Fable tabletop testing, and I felt like it was pretty good, but ultimately not as versatile as a deck like Miraidon. So this was a huge surprise to me, but obviously Sanosuke was able to kind of prove a lot of people wrong and rise to that second place finish, an incredible finish at the World Championships with this really aggressive darkness type deck. And this deck doesn't play any Janine, so no new supporter card from Shrouded Fable that accelerates darkness energy. It's really just no nonsense. And it plays 4 copies of Professor Sada's Vitality and 4 copies of Dark Patch to accelerate energy into play. The 1 copy of the Little Roaring Moon to kind of offset the prize cards. No more Pekko. So no free retreat Morpeko, and just the 1 Prime Catcher as the only switch card in this deck. So no copies of Switch, just relying on Pecharunt EX's Subjugating Chain's ability to switch your Darkness Pokemon in and out of the active spot. And in almost all situations, that's enough. However, we did see those lack of switch cards come to punish Sanosuke in the finals, as he didn't have the switch cards to switch Pokemon in and out of the active spot against Iron Thorns, and was unable to use Pecharunt EX's Subjugating Chains ability to move Pokemon in and out of the active spot because of Iron Thorns EX's initialization ability. So that interaction was majorly at play in the finals, and we could see how many of these abilities were shut down in the finals. Sanosuke was not able to use Squawkabilly EX's Squawk and Seize to get a big turn 1 draw. Wasn't able to use Pecharunt EX's Subjugating Chains. Wasn't able to use Radiant Greninja's Concealed Cards ability to draw extra cards. And wasn't able to use Fezandipity EX's Flip the Script ability to draw 3 extra cards every time a knockout was taken. Going into the finals, I still thought that Sanosuke had a good matchup into Iron Thorns. I mean, you can accelerate a lot of energy into play with Professor Sada's Vitality. I love all of the 4 of item cards that we're seeing here. The 4 of Earthen Vessel, the 4 of Nest Ball, 4 of Ultra Ball, 4 of Trekking Shoes, and the 4 Pokemon Catcher. That is a really solid block of consistency there, combined with the 4 copies of Professor Sada's Vitality and the 4 copies of Pokestop. It felt like Sanosuke should always have enough energy into play to attack with Roaring Moon back-to-back turns. And we did see a contested finals. It went to a Game 3 situation, but Fernando was able to emerge victorious, hitting some crucial crushing hammers, some crucial Pokemon catchers, and eventually running Sanosuke out of usable Pokemon at the end and taking those final 2 prize cards to obtain victory. So it was definitely a really close finals. I felt like it could have gone either way. And this Roaring Moon deck just proved that it had what it takes to compete with the best decks in the format. And I think that part of what made this Roaring Moon deck so successful was that it's a deck that can attack turn 1 going second. So it was going to have a leg up on everybody that chose to play Regidrago V-Star. And I think that that was one of the biggest stories from this World Championships, is that so many people chose to play Regidrago V-Star, and rare candy decks were not really played in as high of counts as a lot of us would have anticipated. I expected a lot of top players to gravitate towards Gardevoir and Charizard, but we kind of saw many of those top players actually gravitate towards these more turbo decks like Regidrago V-Star and Miraidon and Sanosuke with the Roaring Moon EX deck. Speaking of big basic decks, my boy, Jesse Parker coming in 3rd place after an incredible 13-0 record, going undefeated in Swiss, one of the only players in the history of the Pokemon TCG to ever go undefeated in Swiss at the World Championships. And Jesse is now a member of that elite club, playing his favorite deck, Miraidon EX. I was a little nervous about Miraidon EX heading into the World Championships because of its lackluster Charizard matchup. But Jesse is someone who loves playing Miraidon EX, and he's very experienced with the deck. He got 2nd place at a regional championships this year with Miraidon and another top 8 finish with Miraidon. So he has a very good sense of what Miraidon can handle in a metagame and what Miraidon cannot handle. He's kind of seen it all with Miraidon throughout the year. And to hear Jesse tell it, he was not comfortable playing Miraidon EX in a format where Charizard was making up 30% of the field. But his prediction heading into the World Championships was that Charizard was going to be significantly less than that, more like 10 to 15%. And he was thinking that Miraidon has such a strong matchup into so many top-tier decks. Great matchup into Gardevoir, great matchup into Regidrago. And he was feeling so good about those matchups, great matchup into Lugia as well, that he said, okay, I could take a bad matchup, 10 to 15% of the field against Charizard. Let's just not play against any of those. And that's exactly what Jesse did. I don't think Jesse played against a single Charizard at the World Championships, played against a lot of Regidrago decks, and played against an Iron Thorn stack, actually played against Fernando earlier in Swiss and was able to beat him, played against some Lugia decks, and pieced together a 13-0 record heading into the top 4. Obviously a huge accomplishment for Jesse. I'm very proud of him. If you're unaware, Jesse is one of our tabletop stream co-host regulars that we feature here on the channel from the greater Cleveland area. So we'll be having Jesse back on the channel to talk about his Worlds run next week. He just got home from Hawaii this week. So we'll have him back on the channel next week to show off his top 4 trophy and to talk about the World's experience. But Miraidon just really capitalizing on its position in the metagame. Miraidon doesn't always do well against Raging Bolt decks, and it doesn't always do well against Charizard decks. But if you can kind of weave in and out of those matchups and hit your other good matchups, then Miraidon is in a fantastic position. We also saw some other top-tier players like 2-time international championship winner Stefan Ivanov play Miraidon EX at the World Championships as well. Ryan Harris also finished in the top 16 of the World Championships with Miraidon. So Miraidon was not a totally outlandish call. It was, I think, a really good decision that separate players came to the same conclusion on. And I really love Jesse's list as far as Miraidon goes. We could see that Jesse did opt for a very kind of supporter light list that didn't play a lot of copies of Research or Iono, and instead is relying on Rulebox Pokemon's abilities to draw him cards throughout the game. We have Radiant Greninja to use concealed cards and draw extra cards. Mew with its restart ability. Raikou can use Fleet-Footed. Lumineon V's Luminous Sign can go get supporter cards. And of course, the biggest boost to this deck from Shrouded Fable, Fezandipity EX, which I think is very clearly the best new card from Shrouded Fable and is going to be included in a lot of the top decks from this format. Jesse was able to utilize these Pokemon's abilities to piece together winning strategies very consistently throughout the tournament, but we did see all of that come to a screeching halt in top 4. Jesse was able to utilize that one copy of Professor's Research to help refill his hand and draw extra cards one time throughout the game, but otherwise, Jesse didn't have any way to refill his hand if his hand size got too low against the Iron Thorns deck. And even though Jesse was able to piece together the cards he needed to beat Iron Thorns in Swiss, unfortunately, he prized 3 Electric Generator and was unable to accelerate enough energy into play to be competitive in Game 3 of his top 4 match. So ultimately ended up losing to Fernando, and we can see how well Fernando's deck choice played out for him in top 4 and the finals. Both his top 4 opponent and his finals opponent were playing very ability-heavy decks, relying on those rule box abilities to draw cards and stay consistent throughout a series. And Iron Thorns EX's initialization ability was just able to shut all of that down, combined with Crushing Hammer and Pokemon Catchers, was able to neutralize those threats. Most notably, we saw Fernando knock out Jesse's Zapdos a couple of times, which was really key because Zapdos' Lightning Symbol ability makes it so that Miraidon can hit 230 damage with its Photon Blaster attack, which is how many hit points Iron Thorns EX has. And without that Zapdos in play, Jesse was forced to have to 2-hit KO the Iron Thorns. We also see that Jesse decided not to play Raichu. I did see that Stefan Ivanhoff chose to play one copy of Raichu V. Jesse did not, opting for a more low-to-the-ground, streamlined version of the deck that's not trying to take those big one-hit KOs with Raichu at the end of the game to close games out. Instead, just saying, I'm going to go Quick Iron Hands, I'm going to go Blood Moon Ursaluna at the end of the game, and maybe Miraidon in the mid-game in order to piece things together. That strategy obviously worked out for him, but unfortunately lost in top 4. Again, huge congratulations to Jesse for an awesome finish, and I think for showing the world how best to play Miraidon EX in this format. Rounding out the rest of top 4 was RAZWP with his Regidrago V-Star deck. Many top players chose to play Regidrago V-Star at the World Championships, and Regidrago V-Star was one of the most talked about, most hyped, biggest threat level decks heading into the World Championship, and it ended up making up half of top 8, with 4 players making top 8 with Regidrago V-Star. So I'd say that Regidrago V-Star certainly lived up to its hype heading into the event and maybe even exceeded it. It kind of proved to the world that Regidrago V-Star is a very serious contender in this metagame and definitely a top 3 deck in the Pokemon TCG right now. It has the chops to get those big tournament finishes. It has the chops to top cut at major events. It didn't get the win, but it carried many, many players to a top result at the World Championships. And it looks like as far as unique cards in RAZWP's list, we've got the one copy of Canceling Cologne. A lot of players had decided to play at least one copy of Canceling Cologne, so you can make use of Kyurem's Trifrost attack to do 110 damage to 3 different Pokemon, most notably against decks like Gardevoir and Charizard. You can bring up their Manaphy and turn off Manaphy's ability with canceling Cologne so that you can Trifrost and knock out 3 of their Pokemon that they're trying to set up before they have a chance to set up. It's a really gnarly combo that many decks were able to use in order to be successful. Canceling Cologne can also be used effectively against those Iron Thorns EX decks to turn off Iron Thorns' initialization ability so that you have a turn where you can use your abilities like Legacy Star or Myriad Leaf Shower. Raz also played a copy of Temple of Sinnoh, negating the effects of Special Energy. That can be useful against Lugia V Star decks if they play the Legacy Energy, trying to make it so that their Pokemon give up 1 less prize card. It can also generally be useful against Lugia decks if you want to turn off their Gift Energy and be able to Iono them to a low hand size at the end of the game and keep them from drawing enough cards to win with their Gift Energy. I also really like that Raz decided to play the single copy of Cleffa. Cleffa's Grasping Draw is just a really powerful way to start the game, especially in the mirror match. If you're going second, one of the ways to get a jump on your opponent in the mirror match is to promote that Cleffa on the first turn and use its Grasping Draw attack to fill your hand to 7 and force your opponent to take the odd prize and then continue forward by offering up nothing but Regidrago V-Stars and Teal Mask Ogerpon EX throughout the game. One unique exclusion in Raz's top 4 list is that there is no Radiant Pokemon in this list. We saw many Regidrago V-Star players opt to play Radiant Charizard as their Radiant Pokemon of choice. Obviously, Radiant Charizard can do 250 damage at the end of the game to help close out games for just 1 or sometimes 2 or even 3 copies of energy. With Energy Switch, you can actually Energy Switch extra energy onto Radiant Charizard to be able to attack at various points of the game. I did see Zach Lesage also chose to play Radiant Gardevoir as his Radiant of choice, which makes it so that in the mirror match, Regidrago V-Star can't be knocked out by an opposing Lost Impact and can help fix the math in some situations. And I think because Raz decided not to play Radiant Charizard, we also see that Raz chose to play just 2 copies of Fire Energy, while most lists were choosing to play 3. All in all, I think this is a really consistent and solid list, but you would do just fine selecting any of the top 8 Regidrago V-Star decks to use as a starting point. Some lists, as we see, like this list here by Isaiah Bradner, chose to play the Radiant Charizard. The Hawlucha is also a really popular inclusion that you can play using its Flying Entry ability to place 10 damage on 2 of your opponent's bench Pokemon so that then you can finish off 70 hit point basics with Dragapult EX's Phantom Dive attack, placing 6 additional damage counters on those bench Pokemon. So Hawlucha, obviously another big card, and we saw Isaiah use that effectively. Something that I really liked about the way that Isaiah chose to play his mirror matches, something that he was able to show off effectively on stream, was that he would not go for the 2-4-6 route as far as routing your games go, and he would try to go Trifrost twice, which means that he only has to attack with 2 copies of Regidrago V-Star and Trifrost twice to win the game. And it was really interesting watching him go for those plays and win games because of it, knowing the opponent's list, knowing that they didn't have any way to heal damage that he was placing. If you use Kyurem's Trifrost to put 110 damage on a Mew EX, a Pheasantipity EX, and maybe a Squawkabilly EX, then you could just Trifrost one more time, and that's all 6 prizes in 2 attacks, which is a crazy way to win, and a way that Isaiah was always looking for to close out games. And one of the benefits of being able to do that is that when you use Trifrost and don't take a knockout, you actually deny your opponent the opportunity to draw cards with Pheasantipity EX's Flip the Script ability, and we saw Isaiah use that to great effect. It's harder to play around the double Trifrost than it is to maybe sometimes disrupt the opponent's hand, Iono them to low, and keep them from being able to go 2, 4, 6, especially when Radiant Charizard is involved at the end of the game. Sometimes that can be really hard to play around. If you're trying to map your prizes 2, 4, 6, your opponent promotes that Radiant Charizard, Ionos you to a low hand size, and then you don't have the gust to get around the Radiant Charizard, and you just have to take that odd prize card. So that was a really cool route to see. And another thing that Isaiah ended up doing to help make that play easier to pull off is that he would save his Regidrago V-Star's Legacy Star ability until late in the game. A lot of times he was waiting to use his Legacy V-Star to win the game, which was something that was really cool to watch play out over and over. The only other unique deck we saw in top 8 of the World Championships was Raging Bolt EX Teal Mask Ogerpon EX, piloted by James Goring, to a 6th place finish. This list opted to play the copy of Sandy Shocks. It turns out the Dusk Noir line that was kind of hyped going into the World Championships didn't end up coming to fruition, and the tried and true single prizer Sandy Shocks ended up being the best partner for Raging Bolt EX. And I really like this list. It's very no-nonsense. It did opt to play 2 copies of Bravery Charm, which can give Raging Bolt EX a massive 290 hit points, making it really difficult to take down. 4 copies of Trekking Shoes and 3 copies of Pokegear, along with 4 copies of Professor Sada's Vitality. There are 2 different decks that made top 8 of the World Championships that really relied on just 4 copies of Professor Sada's Vitality to accelerate energy into play and draw cards throughout the game. Both this Raging Bolt Ogerpon list and the finalist Roaring Moon EX deck. So we can see how successful Sada's Vitality ended up being as an engine, especially combined with cards like Trekking Shoes, Pokegear, and Pokestop. This ended up being a very turboed out top 8 World Championships. I mean, no setup decks. These are all decks that are trying to announce big, explosive attacks as early as the first or second turn of the game. Not a single rare candy, not a single setup Pokemon, and not any Pokemon that evolved more than once made top 8 of the World Championships. And I noticed a lot of people point that out and say this was a very turboed out World Championships. Attacking quickly and efficiently was definitely the theme of this year's Worlds, and I think a lot of players were surprised, myself included, to see no Gardevoir and no Charizard EX in the top 8 of the World Championships. Raging Bolt EX would have been my prediction as the top big basic deck heading into the Worlds, and I think it still holds up really well. It is kind of a linear and straightforward deck, similar to the Roaring Moon EX deck, but we saw that doesn't really matter. When you're racing to chase down and knock out Regidrago V and Teal Mask Ogerpon EX, it doesn't really matter how linear you are. It just matters how good you are at doing it, right? If you're the first person to take 2 prizes and then close games out by going 4 prizes, 6 prizes, all on 2 prize Pokemon, you're just going to win a whole lot of your games, especially when you start that prize trade on the first turn of the game going second. I love that James decided to play 3 copies of Pokemon Catcher, as that helps the Roaring Moon EX deck to initiate that prize trade in the way that it wants to by targeting down a 2 prize Pokemon on the first attack. You really don't want to take an odd prize if you don't have to. You want to take out a 2 prizer, take out another 2 prizer, take out another 2 prizer, and win the game. And that's what Raging Bolt EX does really well with its Bellowing Thunder attack, which does 70 damage times the amount of energy you discard from your board. You accelerate energy into play with Sada, Teal Mask Ogerpon EX, and you got a broken deck on your hands. Kicking off top 16, Rahul Reddy finished 9th place with a pretty unique take on Lugia V-Star. Lugia V-Star was gaining some traction heading into the World Championships, as it was seen as a deck that could compete with Gardevoir EX and Charizard EX, and also hold its own against many of the big basic decks. And what's really interesting about Rahul's take on the Lugia V-Star deck is that he opted to play a 1/1 Chinchino line and then still play a very lightning heavy list with the Iron Hands and a Raikou V as well as a basic lightning energy and 1 earthen vessel. So there were some big basic Lugia lists that were gaining traction before the World Championships that did not play a copy of Cinccino, and instead were playing like 2 basic lightning, maybe 2 vessel, and an Iron Hands. It looks like Rahul kind of wanted to play that big basic focused Lugia V-Star list, but then also wanted some of what the Cinccino list had to offer with those huge explosive knockouts that could knock out Charizard EX in one hit, right? So I think Rahul kind of combined both those concepts and ended up finding a lot of success with this Lugia list, actually finishing with enough match points to get into the asymmetrical top 8 cut, and but then lost, so ended up finishing 9th place overall. And I feel for Rahul, because I too have finished 9th place at the World Championships by bubbling out. There was no asymmetrical cut in 2015, but I bubbled out a top 8 on opponent's resistance. I unfortunately did not have a chance to play for my top 8 spot, but it's really cool to see how the Pokemon Company continues to listen to fans and make adjustments to their tournament structure. And it was certainly cool that Rahul had a chance to play for a top 8 spot. Still didn't earn it. However, still a very, very successful run with this unique take on Lugia V-Star. Heading into Worlds, everybody wants to know what Tord is going to cook up and what Tord is going to play. Truthfully, I had no idea what Tord was going to play. I thought he was going to gravitate towards Charizard or Gardevoir. That would have been my choice, but I did not foresee a Charizard list quite like this. And this has kind of been Tord's go-to lately, as he really sees these Stage 2 decks as toolbox decks that he could just do whatever he wants with. And it's very difficult to predict what Tord is going to throw at you from his Stage 2 toolbox deck. And you could tell how inspired Tord is by earlier Pokemon TCG formats like RSPK, 2006, and stuff like that, as Tord's lists really look like an RSPK list. He's got just a 2-1-2 Charizard EX line in here, a 2-1-2 Pidgeot EX line. Thin lines, very thin. Charizard EX is the main attacker in this deck, and there's only 2 of them. You really only need 2. I think that's the argument, is you don't actually need more than 2 Charizard EX, right? You can get away with 2. You've also got a Radiant Charizard, and with cards like Hisui and Heavy Ball, your prize cards don't play as big of a factor into being able to search out the necessary Pokemon that you want. He's also got the Pidgeot and Bibarel engine, something that he popularized at international championships earlier in the year and was able to use to great success, kind of bringing that back and saying the Bibarel is still worth playing even with Fezandipiti EX. And then the really unique thing about this list is opting to play that Rabsca. No Manaphy, saying, I am not worried about a turn 2 Radiant Greninja. Instead, I would rather give myself the option to evolve into Rabsca. It is worth noting he's also got the TM Evolution in here, so he can go with a turn 1 TM Evolution and get the turn 1 Rabsca on board, which can use its Spherical Shield ability to prevent all damage from and effects of attacks from your opponent's Pokemon done to your bench Pokemon. So that means that Tord's bench, if Rabsca is set up, is completely safe from damage counters placed from Dragapult EX, completely safe from Radiant Greninja's Moonlight Shuriken attack, just safe from any bench damage, period. And it was really cool to see that Rabsca included. It always felt like Rabsca is a card that had potential, just nobody had really kind of figured out the right environment to make it work, and Tord certainly made it work with his top 16 finish. And you could tell how much a premium Tord puts on consistency in his decks and options, right? He's got every single option you could want. He's got the Bibarel engine with Squovit if he wants to use Industrious Incisors to fill his hand, and Nest Dash to put his hand on the bottom of the deck so he can fill his hand to 5 more cards. He's got that option available. If he wants to use Luminous Sign to go fetch out a supporter card, he's got that option available. If he wants to use Pidgeot EX to hand select exactly what he wants out of his deck, he's got that option available. Another interesting exclusion is that Tord decided not to play any copy of Rotom V. And Rotom V is usually a crutch that I lean on very heavily when playing Charizard EX focused decks. That instant charge turn 1 has come in clutch so many times. But when you take a look at Tord's deck building decisions, you see why he decided to exclude Rotom V. Instead, opted to play Cleffa, which can use its Grasping Draw attack to fill the hand to 7. Tord is not playing any copies of Nest Ball, which means that the Rotom V was going to be pretty difficult to search out. Instead, saying I'm going to play 4 copies of Ultra Ball and 4 copies of Buddy Buddy Poffin, and I can use those cards to go search out either Lumineon if I want it, or Bibarel. You know, I can get Cleffa with Buddy Buddy Poffin. Ultra Ball is going to be the main consistency card here, and using Ultra Ball to go get Rotom V feels pretty bad, where using Ultra Ball to go get Bibarel or a Lumineon feels really good. Tord did play the Fezandipity EX. Also, even without a Nest Ball, I mean, that's the kind of card you could just slam down when you find it, or Ultra Ball for. It still feels good to just draw those 3 cards with Flip the Script at any point in the game. There's so many unique things to talk about with this list. The Thornton inclusion is obviously insane. With a 2-1-2 Charizard EX line, Tord can, have a Charizard get knocked out and have no Charmander in play, and then Thornton one of his various Pokemon into Charmander, then Rare Candy Charizard again, and get a Charizard back swinging out of nowhere. He can also summon a Pidgeot EX out of nowhere. If he's got a Pidgey in the discard pile, can Thornton, Rare Candy Pidgeot, and boom, there you go. He can turn any of his bench Pokemon into a Radiant Charizard at a moment's notice. He can turn Lumineon into Radiant Charizard. He can choose Fezandipity, turn it into Radiant Charizard, and just promote it and start swinging with Combustion Blast. So I really like the flexibility of Thornton in this deck, and it makes a lot of sense considering the very singleton nature of his list. Still opting to play Unfair Stamp as the A-Spec of choice, which I think makes a lot of sense. Being able to Arven for it, turn any of those 4 copies of Arven into a draw card is really good. The Temple of Sinnoh and Collapse Stadium giving Tord the flexibility to turn off special energy or remove a liability from his own bench if he wants to bump Lumineon V, or maybe bump a Fezandipity EX at some point so that he can make it so that his board is more stable. And then the double turbo energy. I mean, what a really unique inclusion, and probably the most unique card in this Charizard EX list. He can use the double turbo energy to attack with Radiant Charizard earlier than opponents might expect him to. He could use the double turbo energy to easily retreat the Radiant Charizard if that's something that he ends up having to do as well. He can also use the double turbo energy to attack with Pidgeot EX or Fezandipity EX. He can use the double turbo energy to retreat Bibarel. If he ends up having to retreat Bibarel in a pinch, double turbo energy can do that. If he needs to retreat Charizard, he can use double turbo energy to do it. The double turbo energy, I think, was just a really flexible card that provided a lot of utility for a lot of what Tord wanted to do in his deck, and allowing the Radiant Charizard to attack a little bit more efficiently, I think, is something that he ended up really valuing throughout his tournament run, and the double turbo energy really helps with that. So really cool list from Tord. He did not disappoint. And then, of course, finishing in the top 16 with Charizard, the top placing Charizard EX deck at the World Championships. Just phenomenal job. The top placing Gardevoir EX deck was also in the top 16 of the World Championships. We had Luo Tianqing from China finish in 12th place at the World Championships with Gardevoir EX. And this list has a lot of what I think players would have expected from Gardevoir EX heading into the World Championships. Gardevoir was considered by many to be a top contender at the World Championships. And I think Gardevoir somewhat undershot its expectations along with Charizard. We did have a Charizard and Gardevoir finish in the top 16, but I expected Gardevoir to be a potentially World Championship winning deck, and it didn't quite make it that far. This list did opt to play Cresselia with its Moonglow reverse attack to help move damage counters off of Gardevoir's bench and target down Pokemon on the opponent's side of the board. Also opted for that TM Devolution, something that a lot of players were looking to play in order to help with their Charizard EX matchup. You can use Technical Machine Devolution at key points in the game to remove your opponent's Pidgeot EX, Charizard EXs from the board, and combined with cards like Iono or Nut and Fair Stamp, you can make it a really tough board state for them to come back from. Just one copy of Turo Scenario. I know some Gardevoir lists were playing 2 copies of Turo Scenario, but Control didn't really show up in a successful way at this year's World Championships. I know Azul and his group decided to play Control, and that didn't go very well for them this year at Worlds, and there wasn't any Snorlax stall decks in the top finishing decks at Worlds, so I think just one copy of Turo Scenario ended up being the right call. And otherwise, just a very consistent list: 4 Iono, 4 Arven, and 2 copies of Artisan, opting to use the Enhanced Hammer instead of the Temple of Sinnoh to deal with those Lugia decks that play the Legacy Energy with the Iron Hands EX. 2 copies of Monkey Dory has become very standard for Gardevoir EX decks. The Adrenabrain ability, just the premier function of the Gardevoir EX decks now. The fact that you can place damage counters on your own Pokemon with Gardevoir EX's Psychic Embrace ability while accelerating energy into play, and then use Monkey Dory's Adrenabrain ability to move those damage counters onto your opponent's Pokemon, means that you just have complete control over where the damage is placed on your opponent's board and how it's placed, and at what pace you take prize cards at. Also, so the double Monkey Dory is pretty much staple in Gardevoir lists nowadays. I was talking to JW, who ended up playing Gardevoir relatively unsuccessfully at the World Championships. He went 3-5 day one. Some players were deciding to cut Radiant Greninja from Gardevoir. JW decided to play Radiant Greninja. I was cutting Radiant Greninja from my list and opting for Tatsugiri instead. But we see here that Luau decided to play Radiant Greninja in his list. And then the Klefki Fluttermane combo means that this deck had 2 options to play around the popular Iron Thorns EX, as both Klefki and Fluttermane can shut down Iron Thorns EX's initialize ability so that Gardevoir is free to use Psychic Embrace to accelerate extra energy into play. I'd say that Gardevoir EX is a deck that has a very good matchup against Iron Thorns, and that would have been my worry or concern heading into the World Championships. I would have been afraid to play Iron Thorns because of its bad matchup to Gardevoir. Gardevoir is playing 2 answers to Iron Thorns that it could easily just get into the active spot and they could use their abilities for free. So that would have been my major holdup. But it seems as if Fernando made the perfect call because Gardevoir didn't end up showing up as strong as many of us would have expected. And then the final unique deck in top 16 of the World Championships, piloted by Lucas Zing, my beloved Chen-Pao Baxcalibur. Oh, I abandoned you, Chen-Pao. I said you couldn't do it in this metagame, but boy, was I wrong. With the odds stacked against him, Lucas proved the world that Chen-Pao Baxcalibur is still a top deck in the Pokemon TCG with a 16th place finish at the World Championships. This Chen-Pao Baxcalibur list is really very unique and different from lists that we had seen popularized throughout the rest of the season, the kind that Lucas was playing to great success at regional championships. This list is playing a 1/1 Origin Form Palkia V-Star in it. That's the major difference. I think that with the 1/1 Origin Palkia V-Star, Lucas is able to be aggressive without necessarily needing to get a turn 2 Baxcalibur. And I think that's kind of genius, right? Because if you're up against a deck that is going to try and chase down your Frigibax or your Bidoof by attacking with Dragapult, then you can use Origin Form Palkia V-Star and kind of guarantee yourself a powerful turn 2 attack, even if you don't have Frigibax at the ready. And I think that that's a really cool, flexible play that this deck can make. You can use Origin Form Palkia V-Star's Star Portal ability to accelerate energy onto Chien-Pao or onto the Palkia itself to do a lot of damage, or onto Radiant Greninja to snipe down Pokemon on your opponent's side of the board if they don't have a Manaphy in play or something like that. It does look like Lucas decided not to play the Canceling Cologne in this list. That's one of the ways Lucas was able to fit the new cards, Origin Form Palkia V-Star and Pheasantipity EX, whose Flip the Script ability is such a powerful option for this deck as your attackers are getting knocked out all the time. Being able to fill your hand to 5 with Bibarel's Industrious Incisors, and then go 3 cards further with Pheasantipity EX's Flip the Script ability just gives this deck so many options to draw cards that it didn't have previously. With Pheasantipity EX, this deck can even function adequately without a Bibarel online at all, which is something that just felt like it couldn't do before Pheasantipity EX was up. It really felt like you were struggling to piece plays together without Industrious Incisors online, but now with Pheasantipity EX and concealed cards, you could see a lot of cards. I mean, 3 + 2, that's 5. That's an Industrious Incisors right there without Bibarel online. And then obviously when you do have Bibarel online, you're going to be absolutely drawn through the deck and having a great time. Just the 302 Baxcalibur line, which is very standard for Baxcalibur decks. A lot of Baxcalibur Chien-Pao lists were playing 3 copies of Chien-Pao. Now we've cut to 2 copies in order to accommodate for the Origin Form Palkia V-Star, which makes a lot of sense. Everything else is extremely standard. There is a Night Stretcher, new card from the Shrouded Fable set, and only 2 copies of Pokestop. That's the one thing about this list that makes me a little bit nervous. I really love 3 copies of Pokestop in the Chien-Pao Baxcalibur list. You can get away with 2 copies. We see that Lucas actually included an Iono as well. So where we cut 1 copy of Pokestop, we've included 1 extra draw supporter with that Iono. Only 1 copy of Cypher Maniac's Code Breaking instead of 2, which a lot of lists were playing earlier as well. And I think that for all of you Chien-Pao Baxcalibur fans out there, Lucas proved himself to be a true Chien-Pao head and a true believer in the Ice Cat, and has shown us all the way to pilot Chien-Pao Baxcalibur in our current formats. That does it for the video. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like the video, sub to the channel, and check out the Twitch stream, twitch.tv/TrickyJim, where I stream live Pokemon trading card game content every weekday, just like the stuff you watched here. Y'all take it easy and have a good one. See ya.